4 months ago, the United States Senate and then the United States House came together to ban the app TikTok on all federal government devices, on tablets, on phones, on computers, on federal contractors and their devices as well. We acted just a few months ago with a sense of urgency because we decided that TikTok was a national security threat, a privacy threat, yes, a data threat, yes, but above all, a national security threat. And we were right to act just those few months ago. And now we must take the next step to ban TikTok nationwide to protect the security of every single American whose personal lives, whose personal data, whose personal security is in danger from the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing. And it's time to act now because we've seen just in the last week the TikTok CEO come before the United States Congress and confirm that the reasons we acted 4 months ago were right and valid, and that the need at this hour is urgent. In this last week, we learned, we confirmed from the testimony of the TikTok CEO that TikTok has the ability to track Americans' data, to track Americans' location, to track Americans' personal lives, whether they want it to or not. What am I talking about? Well, TikTok tracks your keystrokes. Now think about that for a second. It's not just the videos you may upload if you have the app on your phone. It's not just the videos that you watch. It's the keystrokes that you enter, and not just while you are on the app. Oh no. It tracks your keystrokes all the time. What you're texting, what you're emailing. It tracks your contact list. It reads your phone list. We believe, based on independent third-party analysis, that it can get into email. And it does this whether or not the user consents. In fact, there's no way to turn it off. Americans are subject to this ongoing data collection at all hours of the day and night, even if they've got TikTok turned off on their phone. What else have we learned? Well, that TikTok is monitoring the location of Americans. It's not just your keystrokes. It's your location data. Where are you right now? What is it that you are doing? Where are you moving to? Are you in a car? Are you in a building? What floor are you on? TikTok can use the settings of your phone to track exactly where Americans are. And we know that they've been doing this. TikTok has been gathering this data, not just on American citizens, but also on American journalists. We know that they are able to see what journalists are saying, to see where journalists are going. New whistleblower revelations have showed that TikTok has spied on particular American journalists and tried to track them, tried to learn what they are writing, tried to control, in essence, or at least get an understanding of what their message might be. Think about this: an app on your phone that tracks your keystrokes, that reads your personal information, that tracks journalists around, that tracks your location. You can't do anything about it, and we haven't even gotten to the worst part. The worst part is all of this information is accessible to engineers based in China, accessible to the Chinese Communist Party. When he was asked about this last week, the CEO of TikTok didn't deny this espionage. No, what he said instead is, well, I don't think spying is the right way to describe it. Maybe he preferred the word surveillance. Maybe he preferred the word monitoring. Maybe he preferred the word tracking. But I actually think spying just about captures it. The problem with TikTok is not the videos on the app. The problem with TikTok is it's a backdoor for the Chinese Communist Party into the personal lives and information, into the most intimate details of every American's life. And we know the link between TikTok and the Chinese Communist Party is real, and we know that it is strong. TikTok is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chinese parent company, ByteDance. We know that ByteDance has Chinese Communist Party members in its senior leadership. In fact, ByteDance's editor-in-chief is a Communist Party secretary. We know the Communist Party has done trainings for TikTok and ByteDance personnel. We have video of it being done in Beijing, in China. Whistleblowers have come forward to my office and to others and given us evidence that China-based engineers are able to access Americans' personal data at any time that they want. Again, the CEO did not deny that last week. No, the links to the Chinese Communist Party are real, and they are inscribed in Chinese law. This isn't just a matter of what TikTok may want to do. No, TikTok, as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chinese parent company, is subject to Chinese law, which both the 2014 espionage law in that country and their 2017 national security law, which require the company to turn over data that the Chinese Communist Party, that Beijing may request. Under those laws, they must make Americans' data available, must make it available to Chinese communist officials. This is in addition to the CCP members who are actually senior officials in these companies, who work in these companies, who have access to Americans' data as I stand here and speak to you today. The intent of China in all of this is quite clear. They want to build a profile on every single American. We know that many of the recent data hacks of credit agencies, of other digital repositories of Americans' personal information have been carried out by Communist China. They are hungry for information about the American people. They are gathering it on everybody that they can, as much as they can, just like they do to their own citizens. And they're using the app TikTok to do it. Of course, that's not the only way that the Chinese Communist Party has tried to gather information on Americans. This is certainly not the only time that they've done it. Think about the Confucius Institutes all across the country that the CCP funded on America's college campuses. Think about the researchers that they funded and tried to place into key programs, key institutes and universities all across the country. Heaven's sakes, think about the Chinese spy balloon that just went over this country, right over my home state of Missouri just a few weeks ago, photographing everything that they could. Now, this is a pattern. The difference is, in those cases, we addressed it. We shut down the Confucius Institutes. Those who have lied about the money that they have gotten from China, the funding that they have gotten, have in some cases been prosecuted for attempted espionage on America's college campuses. And the spy balloon was belatedly shot down, but shot down at least. No, we've taken action in these other instances to protect Americans, to stop the efforts of the CCP, to spy on America, to collect Americans' data, to put Americans at risk, and now we must do the same thing with TikTok. This is why President Trump, in the previous administration, tried to ban it. Well, let's not forget, this isn't the beginning of this debate. This is the end of it. We've been at this for years now. Years ago, the last administration tried to ban TikTok for all of these same national security reasons that led us as a Congress to ban it on federal devices. Now, this has been a long time coming. There's no rush to judgment here. This is what administration after administration has concluded, that it's time to take action. Here's the real truth, that if it were the Confucius Institutes, this Chinese spy balloon, if it were some American company that was coordinating with a foreign ally, we'd shut it down immediately. And we have done in these other cases. But with TikTok, now TikTok says, oh, no, but you can't do that to us. You can't hold us accountable. We have a special carve-out. No, we have the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects us. Well, I must have missed the class in law school where we covered the First Amendment right to spy. Last time I checked my Constitution, there was no such protection. And I can be darn sure that there is no special First Amendment carve-out for communists. Now, the First Amendment may protect dance videos, sure, upload those all you want, but the First Amendment does not protect the right to spy on American citizens. It does not protect espionage. It does not protect what the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do in harvesting the data of millions of Americans. Now, TikTok has no special First Amendment carve-out. They don't get special privileges that no other entity or an American company would get. They're subject to the same rules. And when you try to spy on American citizens, when you try to use Americans' own phones as portals for collection, that ought to be stopped. You ought to be banned. And the fact that they are a China-based company shouldn't help them or hurt them. The fact is their ties to Beijing, their ties to the CCP, their ongoing efforts at espionage, and their ongoing lies, by the way, to this body. This is a company that has come before this body and lied time and time again. They said that they weren't controlled by ByteDance. Now we know they are. They said that China-based engineers couldn't access American user data. Now we know they can. They said that the CCP had no influence. And yet last week, the CEO of TikTok couldn't even confirm that the CCP hadn't helped write his talking points. Now this is an entity, this is a corporate interest that is influenced, if not controlled, by the Chinese Communist Party. The national security risks are severe and growing worse. And I haven't even talked about the materials on suicide promotion that you'll find on TikTok. I haven't talked about the risks to mental health that it may pose. And there's a reason that TikTok isn't even available in China. Did you know that? In China, TikTok isn't available. Why is that? Well, it's because Beijing isn't stupid. They know it's digital fentanyl. TikTok wasn't designed to make our lives better. TikTok is designed to addict and then to be used as a gateway into our personal lives. It's designed to addict and then to be used as a portal to spy on American citizens. Now, I tell you what, here's one thing that has changed since just December, a few months ago when we banned TikTok on federal government devices. TikTok has gone into full damage control mode. And as big tech companies do all the time, they've hired a fleet of lobbyists and have spent untold amounts of cash. I'm told that even today, TikTok lobbyists have been seen here in the building. I've no doubt that they are scurrying around right now. Maybe they're in the galleries. I just say this, that we have the opportunity today to send a message to this corporate interest that the United States Senate is not for sale, that we cannot be bought, that we cannot be purchased, we cannot be influenced by their lobbying campaign, by their corporate money, that we will instead side with the American people. We'll tell the truth about what this app is. We'll do our jobs and protect Americans. Now, some say that we ought to have a broader bill that would not actually ban TikTok, but would give new authority to the executive branch and leave it open. I don't agree with that. My view is we should act decisively to ban TikTok directly. We shouldn't give new open-ended authority to federal bureaucrats. We should target this threat specifically. That's what this bill does that we have before us today. It goes right at the problem. It bans TikTok in this country. It protects the American people. And it sends the message to Communist China that you cannot buy us. And so I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S-85 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Reserving the right to object. There are two main reasons why we might not want to do this. The one would be the First Amendment to the Constitution. Speech is protected whether you like it or not. The second reason would be is that the Constitution actually prohibits bills of attainder. You're not allowed to have a specific bill against a person or a company. So this fails on two egregious points, pretty obvious points, and I think we ought to think about that. I think we should beware of those who peddle fear. I think we should beware of those who use fear to coax Americans to relinquish our liberties, to regulate and limit our First Amendment rights. Every accusation of data gathering that's been attributed to TikTok could also be attributed to domestic big tech companies. In fact, one of the bills they're looking at doing is broad enough that the president will be given the power to designate whatever country he sees fit to be an adversary and whatever company underneath that definition. It would basically be a limitless authority for the president to ban speech. If Republicans want to continuously lose elections for a generation, they should pass this bill to ban TikTok, a social media app used by 150 million people, primarily young Americans. This brilliant strategy comes while polls indicate that 71% of young women and men, 53% of young men voted for a Democrat candidate for Congress. Admittedly, many Democrats have joined Republicans in calling for this ban, but like most issues, the blame will stick to the Republicans more. The Republican strategy to ban TikTok comes simultaneously with GOP complaints of domestic social media companies canceling and censoring conservatives. Without a hint of irony, many of these same conservatives now rail against censorship while advocating for censorship against social media apps they worry are influenced by the Chinese. Before banning TikTok, these censors might want to discover that China already bans TikTok. Do we really want to emulate Chinese speech bans? Aren't we the ones that say it's wrong for China to ban speech, so we're going to be just like China and ban speech we're afraid of? The Vice President of FreedomWorks, John Tamney, perhaps described this situation best. Nauseating harassment of TikTok presumes Americans will be saved from Chinese authoritarianism if U.S. politicians act like Chinese authoritarians. We're going to be saved from speech if we ban it in our country. My goodness, could we think of anything more antithetical to the freedom of speech? Well, go to the app. They say, oh, the app's full of propaganda, and your young people will be dancing into communism. Well, go to the app and search for Falun Gong, the anti-communist religious sect that is persecuted in China. Go to TikTok and search for videos advocating Taiwan's independence, criticism of Chinese President Xi Jinping. Videos are all over TikTok that are critical of official Chinese positions. That's why TikTok is banned in China. Do we want to follow China's lead in banning speech? We should not let fear of communism to cause us to ignore our First Amendment protections of speech. This legislation violates not only the First Amendment of those who own TikTok, many of whom are actually Americans, not Chinese, but it also violates the First Amendment rights of the millions of young Americans who use this social media app. I ask the American people, do you want Joe Biden to be your censor? Do you want to give unlimited power to any president, regardless of party, to decide who is our adversary and which countries, and then which countries? There's not even a list of what percentage. What if the Chinese own 1% of a company or 10% of a company? One of the bills before us would allow the Department of Commerce to decide. There's 5 countries they list that are adversaries. These are big countries that have a lot of interaction with our country already. Decide which country, in addition to the 5. The Department of Commerce can designate a country as an adversary, but then they can designate a company. But there's no specific. Do the new people that are designated to be an adversary have to own 100% of the company, 50% of the company, 1% of the company? This is a crazy gift of power to one person. And I don't care which party they're in, it's a huge mistake. Doctors Muller and Farhad of Georgia Tech write, if nationalist fears about Chinese influence operations lead to a departure from American constitutional principles supporting free and open political discourse, we will have succeeded in undermining our system of government more effectively than any Chinese propaganda. Throughout the 20th century, millions of people were fed communist propaganda every day for their entire lives. And when the regimes collapsed, the people celebrated. They danced on the Berlin Wall and on the grave of communism. Have faith that our Americans are smart enough to hear bad ideas and reject those ideas. Have faith that our desire for freedom is strong enough to survive a few dance videos. Have some faith in freedom. We don't ban things that are unpopular in the United States. Our Constitution even allows a communist party. The previous speaker said, and I quote, there's no First Amendment carve-out for communists. Well, actually there is. In our society, you can be a communist. I don't advocate it. I think it's a terrible idea. And almost no Americans choose it, but there's a Communist Party here. We actually had a former CIA director who said he voted for the communist candidate in 1976. Someone I don't advise you would appoint to be the head of your CIA. But this is a free country. You can actually have terrible ideas and you can broadcast them. That's what freedom of speech is about. It's not about saying, oh, you know, I love Mother Teresa. It's not about saying things uncontroversial. It's about the ability to say things that people don't like. Have some faith in freedom. Our Constitution does protect even despicable speech, even the Communist Party. It operates today. Nobody wants to join the Communist Party, but you still can if you wish. America is a country that celebrates free expression, that cherishes free association, that is confident in the cause of liberty. If you want to address the evils of big tech, it's not the Chinese government you have to fear, but your own. In June 2021, Newsweek reported that big tech complied with 85% of government requests to hand over your personal data. So you're worried about the Chinese government? Your government has all of your data and they're sucking it up from all the big tech. So the thing is your next step to ban big tech in our country? There are some people that are promoting banning TikTok, and their next step is Facebook. This is on both sides of the aisle. This contagion is infecting the whole country, both parties. Realize that this means, with 85% of government requests to big tech being honored, this means that Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, once presented with a subpoena or a warrant, routinely hands over the documents of emails, text messages, photos, documents, calendars, contact lists, and more to your government. Big tech puts up virtually no legal fight to protect your privacy. They could go to court to stop this. Instead, there's a big cable that runs from big tech to the government, and they snoop on every bit of our information. So you want to protect privacy? Why don't we start by protecting our own privacy in this country? To those who are worried that the Chinese government might somehow now have access to millions of Americans' teenage information, realize that all social media sucks up personal data that people voluntarily provide. If you're going to ban TikTok, what's next? Arguably, several domestic apps censor conservatives more than TikTok. I know this because I've been censored and I've been banned. I've had speeches on the Senate floor that are protected by the Constitution, banned and kicked off of YouTube. I despise these people, but I'm not going to vote to ban them because I realize that intellectually, in a free country, I don't have the right to tell the New York Times to publish my op-ed or YouTube to publish my speech. I don't like what they do. Quit using them. That's what happens in a free country. You don't like TikTok? Quit using them. But don't disenfranchise 150 million Americans who are using a social media app and just say, no big deal. This is the First Amendment rights of 150 million Americans. I have a host of complaints about domestic social media platforms. They cancel conservatives, but I'm not in favor of banning one of them or regulating their speech or telling them who can post and who can't post. That's what the First Amendment's about. If you don't like TikTok or Facebook or YouTube, don't use them. But don't think that any interpretation of the Constitution gives you the right to ban them. TikTok's mission appears to be, like most other companies, to make money, and lots of it. TikTok is actually cooperating with our government. There's something called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., CFIUS, and TikTok's agreed to put all of their data in Oracle's cloud, and they have agreed to work with the U.S. government. Because they so much want to make money, they will do anything to try to get rid of this accusation that they're somehow part of the Communist Party, which is not true. It's a company that's owned, probably the majority of it, by Americans and Europeans and other Asians outside of China. Less than 50% of it's owned by any Chinese. There is no Chinese government of the American TikTok. But even that being said, they're willing to put all of it under the Oracle cloud. They're willing to have U.S. regulators be given access to this, all because they want to continue to make money. They don't want to be shut down by the censors. The First Amendment isn't necessary to protect speech that everybody accepts. The First Amendment exists to protect speech that might be unpopular or might be controversial. U.S. courts have already struck down the Trump ban on TikTok. It amazes me now that the other side that was so horrified by the idea of President Trump banning something is now jumping on board to ban it themselves. I hope saner minds will reflect on which is more dangerous, videos of teenagers dancing or the precedent of the U.S. government banning speech. For me, it's an easy answer. I will defend the Bill of Rights against all comers, even if need be from members of my own party. I object.
The objection is heard.
Madam President,
Senator from Missouri.
would the senator from Kentucky entertain a question?
I object.
No. The objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Missouri.
Madam President, I have never before heard on this floor a defense of the right to spy. I didn't realize that the First Amendment contained a right to espionage. The senator from Kentucky mentions the Bill of Rights. I must have missed the right of Chinese governments to spy on Americans in our Bill of Rights, because that's what we're talking about here. The senator from Kentucky can watch as many dance videos as he wants. I have no objection to that. Could watch them on this floor for all I care, fine. What I object to is the Communist Chinese Party using this app on Americans' phones to spy on Americans without their consent. The senator says that Americans can simply not use this app, just turn it off. That's not the case. If you turn it off, it continues to collect information. You don't get to consent. TikTok doesn't ask you, do you want to share your information? It takes it. It doesn't ask you for permission to track your location. It takes it. It doesn't ask you for permission to share it with the Communist Chinese Party. It just does it. That's the problem. Scour the Constitution, scour the First Amendment. I promise you, you won't find any right to espionage. You won't find any right to spy. And this novel right that the senator thinks he has discovered for Americans to be spied upon, I've never heard of such a thing in the history of this country. I'm astounded to learn that Americans have the right to be spied upon. So not only does China apparently get the right to spy in the First Amendment, Americans have the inalienable right to be spied upon and have all of their data taken from them. That apparently is democracy. That's not democracy. That is the abuse of our laws, the abuse of our economy, the abuse of our people by a foreign government for its purposes. So I say again, watch dance videos to your heart's content. But spy on Americans, that's where we have to draw the line. As to money, the senator said, and I think he's exactly right, that TikTok wants to make money, no doubt about it. And the money they are making, and the money that they are showering on this building, and it is having an effect. But in the end, the American people don't want to be treated as commodities to be bought and sold. Because make no mistake, it's the American people who are being bought and sold here by TikTok. They're being sold to the Chinese Communist Party for influence and money. They're being sold for the wishes and the whims of Beijing. And they're being lied to every step of the way.
Republicans point at Democrats and say, we don't like your programs, let's cut your programs. Democrats look at Republicans and say, no, don't cut our programs, cut yours. Everybody's don't cut mine, cut yours. That's why I've taken the approach and continue to take the approach, we should cut everything across the board. In the past, there were always like conservatives who say, let's get rid of public television, let's get rid of Sesame Street and Big Bird, and they'd get so much grief over it. It's like, why do that? You're not balancing the budget over Big Bird. Take 1% of Big Bird's budget. Take 1% of everybody's budget. And what would that bring about? It would bring about more conservation of the dollar. It would bring about more restraint and more reform. I'll end with this. People say, where would you cut? I would say everywhere. But I can give you, on the tip of my hand, ridiculous stuff that should have 100% cut, but is never cut and goes on and on. In the early 1970s, William Proxmire, a conservative Democrat, pointed out that the National Science Foundation was spending $50,000 to study what makes people fall in love. Now, that's a better, I think, topic for Cosmopolitan magazine than it is for a government study. Nowadays, it's gone up. We spent $1 million having young people take selfies of themselves while smiling and then looking at it later in the day to see if Looking at pictures of yourself smiling makes you a happier person. That costs you $1 million. We spent $1.5 million studying the mating call of the Panamanian frog to see if the mating call of the country frogs was different than the city frogs. We spent nearly $1 million studying the Japanese quail to see if they're more sexually promiscuous when they're on cocaine. I think we could have just polled the audience on that one. This is the kind of ridiculous stuff, but does it get better? I complain about this every year and all the time, and everybody shakes their head and says, no way, why are we doing that? The National Science Foundation, we increased their budget 50% last year. People said, oh, we have to compete with China, so let's give the National Science Foundation more money. We've almost increased their budget by 50%. The people are studying why you go on dates, why you're happy, why the male frogs, what their mating call is. This is the craziness, but it never gets better because we always spend more money. So my amendment would do this. My amendment would reduce the spending in real terms. We'd actually spend less money next year than last year. It'd be a 5% reduction in money, and you'd spend less each year, and over 5 years you'd balance your budget, and then we'd be on course to balance. People say, why not? Who can do this? Half of Europe does it. Sweden balances their budget. Germany balances their budget. Over half of the countries of Europe run an annual balanced budget. Our profligacy and our spending is catching up to us. I say we act now, and I recommend a yes. And I call up amendment number 107 and ask that it be reported by number.
Clerk will report by number.
The senator from Kentucky, Mr. Paul, proposes an amendment numbered 107.
The Biden-McCarthy debt deal will do nothing to avert the looming debt crisis. A debt deal that creates no limits to the debt accumulation over 2 years is not fiscally responsible and should be rejected. My amendment replaces the spending caps with caps that balance the budget in 5 years and limits the extension of debt to $500 billion, and I urge a yes vote.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Respect to my colleague, I strongly urge a no vote. This amendment would create catastrophic damage throughout the federal economy, with spending cuts as much as 37% by 2028, putting federal programs like Medicare, Medicaid, border security, and transportation into extremely difficult circumstances. This is not the America that Americans expect, and we should not allow this vote to pass.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
President, many Americans remember waking up on Saturday morning to watch their favorite cartoons, including shows like The Jetsons. As I look at the Senate pages who are here, I suspect none of you have any memory of The Jetsons. For those who are under 40 in the chamber or watching at home, The Jetsons was a futuristic cartoon set in the year 2062. And it depicted a family from the future who had fun, imaginative technologies like jetpacks and holograms and video calls and robot vacuums and smart watches and flying cars. While we're still waiting to see those flying cars in the air, we already have a lot of the Jetsons technology available to us now. In many cases, even better than what was depicted in cartoon on the show. Today, internet-connected smart devices are commonly used in American households. Light bulbs, mirrors, air fryers, coffee makers, trash cans, kitchen faucets, refrigerators, and more are all becoming, quote-unquote, smart. And we're able to control them with our phones or voice commands. A lot of that is really cool. It's expected that in a few years, nearly 70% of American households, more than 80 million households, will own at least one smart home product. And this is by and large a good thing. Smart devices can help us improve our quality of life and complete daily tasks more easily. But with any technological advancement, there can be trade-offs. And for smart devices, one of the potential trade-offs is our privacy. In Texas, we've become very aware of that cost. The past few years, smart thermostats have allowed electric companies to control the temperature in your own home from afar in the name of conserving energy. Furthermore, a lot of Americans don't realize or expect that the growing number of smart household devices and appliances have cameras on them and microphones that can surreptitiously record families and transmit data. In other words, when you're buying a new refrigerator, you don't expect your fridge to record you or listen to you or spy on you without your knowledge. And while some manufacturers have responsibly taken steps to more clearly label their products and to let consumers know they contain listening devices or cameras, others have not. And so, I've introduced bipartisan legislation, which I authored alongside Senator Cantwell of Washington, a Democrat and the chairman of the Commerce Committee. I'm the ranking member of the Commerce Committee. Our bipartisan legislation would simply ensure that this information is clearly communicated to consumers so that you're informed before you buy a product that's going to photograph you or film you or record you, so that doesn't happen against your wishes and without your knowledge. Now, I expect in a minute we're going to hear opposition to my bill. Opposition focused on the proposition that any mandate put on a private company is somehow a burden. And it's a mandate to require your refrigerator manufacturer to tell you if your fridge is spying on you. Now, I'm sympathetic to the argument that there are too many mandates from government and that many of the mandates are unnecessary and burdensome and costly. But requiring a manufacturer to tell you if they're spying on you does not fall into that category. And I have to say, in assessing the minimal burden, the disclosure burden, against the harm, I fall down on the side of individual liberty. I fall down on the side of privacy. I don't think the American people want their air fryer spying on them, and at a minimum, they have a right to know if their air fryer is spying on them. Now, I would note, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle agree. The presiding officer today serves on the Commerce Committee. This legislation passed the Commerce Committee by voice vote, with bipartisan support from both sides of the aisle. This should be a simple, easy, pro-privacy step to protect consumers. For that reason, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 538, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the Cruz-Cantwell substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
reserving the right to object. Far too often, Congress operates under the delusion that we know what is best for the American consumer. Instead of allowing market participants to determine the information they want, we seek to manipulate the free market to impose our preferences on private actors. As I'm sure my colleague will readily agree, the federal government is far too large in size and scope. In this case, additional federal regulation and the associated potential penalties and costs is not appropriate. This is not a case of industry committing fraud or making willful misrepresentations about their products. This bill simply mandates what manufacturers must tell consumers because it assumes that consumers are not sophisticated enough to make the judgment themselves. If American consumers want more information about a product, they can be sure they will make it known. If a manufacturer wants to sell more of their products, you can be sure they will listen to the consumers. Congress doesn't need to insert itself into every equation. I object.
Objection is noted.
Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
so I've listened to the objections of my friend from Kentucky, and I use that word as many do on this floor, although he's not listening to my response, but that's his choice. The first time I ever spoke on the floor was in support of Senator Paul's filibuster in 2013. Senator Paul is fond of telling his constituents that he's a libertarian, that he defends privacy. I'm not quite a libertarian, I'm a conservative, but I have strong libertarian leanings. And I want to note the irony that Senator Paul, who's devoted his entire public career to defending liberty and defending privacy, just objected to protecting the privacy of over 300 million Americans. Just objected to Americans knowing whether they're being spied on at home. I have to admit, it's truly flabbergasting. I'd like to invite my colleague, Senator Paul, to join me in front of a gathering of libertarians. And let's discuss with libertarians which side of the aisle you want to be on. Do you want to be on the side of big business, surreptitiously tape recording, photographing, and videoing you in your home, in your bedroom, without you knowing about it? Or is a mild and nominal disclosure requirement simply saying if you're going to tape record someone or videotape them in their house, you got to tell them? Is that a justifiable burden? I hope that in time reason will prevail, because we ought to be protecting privacy. This is a bill, if we vote on the Senate floor, I'm confident the vote would be 99-1. I am confident every senator, except the senator who just objected, would support this bill. Protecting people's privacy is a good idea, and I hope the Senate can get there as a body. I yield the floor.
29 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report by number.
Senator from Virginia, Mr. Kane, proposes amendment number 429.
I ask unanimous consent that there be 6 minutes equally divided prior to a vote on the amendment.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Madam President, this is an amendment dealing with the power of the NATO alliance. We have seen since the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine that NATO allows the democracies to link arms and stand courageously against an illegal invasion of Ukraine by the dictator Vladimir Putin.
The Senate will be in order.
Some had questioned the value of NATO, but NATO has demonstrated its power to protect democracy against this invasion since February of 2022. There had been an issue raised in the last few years about whether any president could unilaterally withdraw from NATO, which was approved by the Senate in a treaty. The Constitution of the United States indicates that the Senate must ratify treaties, but is silent about how to exit treaties. The United States Supreme Court in 1979 said that is a political question for the legislature and the executive to resolve. What this amendment would do would make plain that no one could withdraw from NATO, the United States from NATO, without either a two-thirds vote in the Senate or an act of Congress. We've received a green light for this in the Goldwater v. Carter decision in 1979. And I think of all the treaties that the U.S. has entered into right now at this moment, in the aftermath of this summit in Lithuania and during this war in Europe, this Congress should send a powerful message to our allies in NATO that we stand with this historic alliance. The administration supports this amendment. I would reserve the remainder of my time.
The senior senator from Mississippi.
For a few seconds in opposition to this amendment, it is absolutely unnecessary. I cannot think of any currently serving elected official of significance who's calling for suspending or withdrawing from NATO. If I didn't know better, I would think that this amendment might be aimed as a slap at former President Trump, but surely that is not the case. If it is, however, we should be reminded that the former president was concerned about some of NATO's members not meeting their obligations to spend 2% of GDP, but that he was fully committed to Article 5 of NATO. You will be pleased to know that this bill, NDAA, addresses the concern of the 2%. We adopted an amendment at markup, sponsored by Senator Sullivan, that would require the Secretary of Defense to prioritize NATO members who are meeting or exceeding the 2% GDP defense spending target when the DoD is making decisions on basing, training, and exercise. I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. President, how much time do I have remaining?
Is the senator opposed to the amendment?
Yes.
1 minute and 40 seconds remaining.
Could I have unanimous consent to have one additional minute?
Is there objection? Without objection, senator from Kentucky is recognized.
It is unconstitutional for the legislature to change the Constitution. While the Constitution provides a role for both the President and the Senate when entering a treaty, it is silent regarding how to exit a treaty. When the question of treaty termination first arose in 1793, President Washington and his cabinet endorsed the view that the President's executive power included the ability to unilaterally terminate a treaty. Withdrawal from the treaty obligations permitted the U.S. to maintain neutrality in a war between France and Great Britain, and it was done unilaterally by President Washington. The power to enter treaties is found in Article 2, which vests the President with the executive power. Unlike a legislative body, the President can act with unity and dispatch, precisely the qualities needed to negotiate a treaty, so the founders grounded this authority in Article 2. Passing this amendment is tantamount to altering the Constitution because the amendment would authorize the Senate to infringe upon the executive powers of the President. The Senate has no voice when exiting a treaty. This would amend the Constitution and is unconstitutional, and that's a good thing. The founders wanted it to be difficult to commit the U.S. to international obligations and easy to get out. We should follow the Constitution and vote no on this amendment.
Time I have remaining.
1 minute, 17 seconds.
On the constitutional argument, my colleagues, this very question came before the Supreme Court of the United States in 1979. President Carter terminated a Taiwan-related treaty and was sued by Senator Goldwater and others. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. The court said because the Constitution on exiting a treaty is silent, it is a political question that the legislature and executive can resolve for themselves. The Supreme Court refused to overturn Carter's action. That is a clear green light that if Congress, the legislative and executive branch agree that on this particular treaty, the silence does not dictate but can be the source of legislation, we would be able to undertake this action. Finally, I note this is widely bipartisan, and I thank Senator Rubio and many other Democratic and Republican colleagues who have co-sponsored this amendment to stand strong at this moment with NATO. With that, I yield.
Is left on this unnecessary and extraneous amendment.
1 minute and 11 seconds.
I urge a no vote for those reasons.
Question is on the amendment. Is there a sufficient second on the amendment? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered, but the senator will state his inquiry.
And this will be a 10-minute vote, and those senators who arrive after 10 minutes and a brief grace period will not be allowed to vote. Is that the position of the chair?
10-minute votes have been ordered.
I appreciate the clarity.
The clerk.
Ms. Baldwin.
The clerk will call the roll.
I'm back again, Mr. President, to try to keep the National Flood Insurance Program from expiring. I will be the first to concede that America needs a national flood insurance program that looks like we designed it on purpose. What we have now does not look like that. To call it imperfect is an understatement. But the only thing worse than having what we have right now is to not have a national flood insurance program at all. The fact of the matter is that for all practical purposes, people who are at risk for flooding cannot buy flood insurance from the private markets, which means they can't buy a home, which means their mortgages would be foreclosed upon. That's why we have a national flood insurance program. Should we improve it? Yes. I've been trying for 7 years. We need to keep trying, but we're not going to get it done over the next couple of days. I believe government's going to shut down tomorrow, or at least Saturday, rather. I hope not, but I believe it is. And if it does, the National Flood Insurance Program will be shut down. I don't want to scare people half to death. It doesn't mean that FEMA will stop, which runs the NFIP, will stop paying claims. But it will shut down commerce, if nothing else, because FEMA can't issue new policies. And again, I realize it's not perfect, but we are in hurricane season. Let me say that again. We are in hurricane season. Is this important to my state? You bet. But it's not just important to my state. It's important to every single coastal state. And that's why I would like to see us extend this program for a very, very short period of time. My bill is a clean extension. It doesn't make any changes to the program. I wish I had the authority to make changes, but I don't. This bill will just extend what we have now, imperfect as it may be. And Lord knows it's imperfect. Through December 31, 2023. That will give us some additional time to design a program that looks like somebody designed it on purpose. So, Mr. President, for that reason I ask unanimous consent. Did I mention, Mr. President, that my state is in the middle of hurricane season? Let me say that again. And so is every coastal state. And we're going to shut down the National Flood Insurance Program in the middle of hurricane season. The United States Senate. What planet did we just parachute in from? For that reason, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of my bill, S-2968. It's at the desk. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Kentucky.
reserving the right to object, we can today renew the National Flood Program and reform it. All it takes is for the senators assembled here not to object to the reforms. I think that flood insurance provided by the taxpayer, subsidized by the taxpayer, shouldn't be for rich people and shouldn't be for their vacation home or their beach homes. Government's got no business, insuring rich people and their second homes. So I have some proposals to reform the system. We're being asked, though, to extend the flood program without any reforms to protect the taxpayers. Like many federal programs, the flood insurance is well-intentioned, but it very well may be the best real-life example of a moral hazard. The program covers over 5 million policyholders and provides over $1 trillion in coverage. We're told that the program is funded through insurance premiums, but charging well below the market price of insurance and capping how much these rates can rise inevitably leads to shortfalls. A 2014 report by the Government Accountability Office found that the flood program collected as much as $17 billion fewer in premiums than what the market would have dictated. So when the program inevitably found itself in need of money, in theory, it borrowed that money from the taxpayers. Not that the taxpayers had any choice in the matter. They took it as they often are. They were on the hook, regardless of whether they wanted to be or not. Just a few years ago, the flood program owed over $30 billion to the taxpayers. Congress later canceled $16 billion in debt, but the flood program has not made any further repayment to the taxpayers and now stands at over $20 billion in debt. In short, it's a subsidy, it's a gift. It's the taxpayer giving people who have homes along the coast subsidized rates, and we all have to pay for it. Now, you might say, well, maybe some poor people have no place to go. The government has a role in that. But a lot of these homes are people's second homes. I say we should limit the insurance to houses under a certain amount, people with modest homes. Some guy's got a $5 million mansion on the coast of Florida should not get his insurance through the government. We shouldn't all have to pay for the insurance for somebody that's got a $5 million home. The taxpayers are expected to cough up money whenever the program needs it, but the program doesn't seem to be in a hurry to pay the taxpayer back. But perhaps the greatest insult to the taxpayer is the lack of true limits on the delinquent program. There are no limits on how many claims that can be filed and how much money can be received by a policyholder. Rather than encourage people to leave flood-prone areas, it encourages people to stay and rebuild. And in thousands of instances, the program encourages people to rebuild and rebuild and rebuild. According to the Pew Charitable Trust, over 150,000 properties have been rebuilt over and over again. In fact, 25 to 30% of flood program claims are made by policyholders whose properties flood time and again. There's no learning curve here. The government provides you something for a subsidy, and you got your beach home, and it keeps getting flooded. You just keep building it if the government will pay for it. Have Uncle Sam pay for it. Have your neighbors pay for it. Over 2,000 properties have flooded more than 10 times. They don't move. They just keep rebuilding in an area that's a flood zone. One home in Bachelor, Louisiana flooded 40 times and received a total of $428,000 in flood payments. It would have been cheaper to buy them a new home in a neighborhood that doesn't flood. Can you imagine having to withstand the ordeal of your home flooding 10, 20, 40 times? Well, the taxpayer doesn't have to imagine paying for it because they're stuck with the bill. Adding insult to injury, the Congressional Budget Office found that the flood program tends to benefit the wealthy, and that 23% of subsidized coastal properties were not even the policy owner's first house. We're talking about vacation houses that average ordinary people who are suffering to go to the grocery store are having to pay for the insurance for some guy's vacation home. Yes, it's true, the government forces the taxpayer to rebuild the summer homes of the rich. In fact, sometimes it seems that the flood program caters directly to the wealthy. Nearly 80% of these flood policies are located in counties that rank with the top 20% of income. Enough is enough. It is an insult to rob from the taxpayer to give to the wealthy. That is why I offer an amendment that would require the flood program to cover only primary residences, no vacation houses, and establish a cap so that only modestly priced houses would be in it. I agree that there's a disruption. If it ends immediately, there'll be a disruption. We can have an interim. My offer today, if accepted, if not objected to, would be, today we fix this. We can stand right here today and fix this if there is no objection. We will continue the program only for primary residences, only under a certain amount, and it would continue. We'd finally reform it. Long-awaited reform that people have wanted for years could happen today if there is no objection. So therefore, I ask the senator to modify his request so that the Paul amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Does the senator from Louisiana so modify his request?
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President. Maybe the homes that my good friend Senator Paul is describing are homes in Kentucky, but they're not homes in Louisiana. The homes in Louisiana that need flood insurance are not mansions. These are homes of working people. These are modest homes being paid for by people who get up every day, go to work, obey the law, pay their taxes, and try to do the right thing by their kids. I don't know about the millionaires that Senator Paul is talking about. Again, maybe they're in Kentucky, but they're not in Louisiana. My coast is a working coast. Point two, what Senator Paul proposes is to limit flood insurance to $250,000. The median sales price of a home in America today is $430,300. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is President Biden's inflation. But those are the facts. In Louisville, Kentucky, the median sales price is $271,000. In Dallas, Texas, it's $389,000. In Miami, it's $605,000. Why do you want to fool the American people? Why do you want to reform a flood insurance program that is going to deny flood insurance? Do some people own second homes? Yes. I thought Republicans weren't supposed to penalize success in America. I thought our position was that if you worked hard and accumulated wealth, first, you should get to keep most of it. Why? Because you earned it. And second, we should applaud success in America. If you earn enough to buy a second home, we shouldn't discourage that. The third reason I cannot agree to my friend Senator Paul's suggestion is because he knows as well as I do that many of us have worked together to try to reform the flood insurance program. We haven't reached consensus yet. We're going to keep working. But if I agree to Senator Paul's suggestion today, both he and I will be selling out our colleagues who would not agree to these changes. And they're not here right now. Now, the easy thing for me to do is to accept Rand's proposal. But I don't play that way. I'm not going to do it without giving every member of this Senate, which would like input into Senator Paul's suggestions, the chance to object as well. I don't play it that way. And for that reason, I object.
The objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Reserving the right to object. The statistics really do tell the story. 23% of all homes that are insured under this program, whether they're in Louisiana or any other coastal state, are second homes or vacation homes. I would be perfectly willing to negotiate what the actual price of the home is that can be in this situation, and I would offer to modify the amendment from $250,000 to $350,000 to allow more homes to be in. But saying that the median is $433,000, well, the limit right now is infinite. There is no limit. You can have a $5 million vacation home and the government's going to subsidize it. Now, if we don't subsidize someone's house, does that mean we're discouraged or thinking people have wealth or have second homes? No, this has nothing to do with that. It's just saying the taxpayer shouldn't subsidize rich people. But the thing is the reform will be objected to today, and there will not be any reform to this program, and these programs go on year after year because no one will bring to light what is actually happening here. If you were to ask the American people today, do you think we should be subsidizing flood insurance for people's beach house? I think they'd say no. Buy your own damn insurance if you have a beach house. The government shouldn't be paying for it. So I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I appreciate my colleague, Senator Paul, and his comments. And I, like him, would like to continue to work with our colleagues to reform this program. But when reality calls, you shouldn't hang up. And that's what we've done here today. Because this government's going to shut down. I hope I'm wrong. God, I hope I'm wrong. But I think this government is going to shut down midnight, Sunday night. And the National Flood Insurance Program is going to shut down with it. Right smack dab in the middle of hurricane season. I thought the first role of government, I thought this is what Republicans believed. I thought this is what libertarians believed. The first role of government is to protect people and property. And all the United States Senate has done today is expose ordinary Americans, not millionaires, ordinary Americans who live in modest homes, who get up every day, I'm going to say it again, and go to work and obey the law and pay their taxes and try to do the right thing by their kids, and whose home is their biggest asset. And we're going to tell them it's okay. Even though you can't buy the flood insurance from a private provider, the government is going to stop you from buying it from the National Flood Insurance Program right in the middle of hurricane season. That's not what this country's all about. All my bill would have done, and I'll be back, just like the Terminator. I'll be back. All my bill would do would be to take the current program. I know it looks like the current program, I will concede, I agree with Rand. The current program looks like somebody knocked over a urine sample. It's that bad. But we need to work to improve it. But in the meantime, we do not need to allow it to expire.
Madam President, last Saturday, October the 7th, we saw evil personified. We saw the deadliest attack on the Jewish state since the Yom Kippur War. Over 1,400 dead Israelis. And for context, think of that, if that were America, it would be over 40,000 dead Americans. On top of that, Madam President, we've seen 30 Americans lose their lives because of the evil brought upon Israel. We saw Hamas, an evil terrorist organization, launch an unprecedented, unprovoked, undeniably devastating attack on the Jewish state. I can't think of anything more evil than the images that we saw coming out of Israel, where grandmothers were taken captive, where babies were burned alive, and where babies were beheaded. For what reason? For what reason did we see the atrocities and the evil brought upon a people? Simply because they were Jews. Hamas, their goal is to eliminate the Jewish state. But that's not where they stop. They want to annihilate every single Jewish person on the planet, with more than 6 million living here at home in America. But they go one step further. They despise Western democracy. They want the elimination, the annihilation of our entire way of life. Fighting that war with a single-minded focus is exactly what we should expect from the Jewish people, from the state of Israel, from the Prime Minister Netanyahu. He needs to have a single-minded focus. But that is not the case, because we have seen in the last 24 hours or so the emergence of a different kind of war that they now must fight. It is the war of misinformation. The disinformation, the misinformation war could be just as deadly, if not more deadly, than the actual attack we saw last Saturday, October the 7th. One might ask the question, why would I say that? Well, I would say that because immediately what we've seen since the devastation in Israel was Prime Minister Netanyahu sending the signal that they were coming into Gaza, giving people, Palestinians, a chance to find themselves out of harm's way. But the misinformation campaign takes a different turn, a different spin, a different direction. What it said was that the hospital strike was in fact carried out by Israel. That misinformation was carried in the New York Times, the AP, and other news outlets in America. That misinformation campaign caused a summit in Jordan to be canceled. It caused President Biden's meetings to be canceled. It caused protests at embassies around the globe. Our embassies around the world felt the devastation of misinformation, of lies signaling to the world that now Israel must fight a different kind of war at the exact same time that they have a proportional response, which is and should be wiping Hamas off the face of the map. We saw as a result of that misinformation war, Hezbollah mobilizing. We've seen very clearly an attempt to weaken Israel and their standing in the world. Devastation after devastation, and then on top of that, we see the emergence of another deadly counter. Rather than waiting for the facts, these outlets carried the Hamas narrative, carrying the narrative of an evil, lying, terrorist organization. And on top of that, equally as devastating is to see the divide within the House of Representatives, where the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats stand firm with our ally, Israel. But there are members in the squad who have decided to continue spreading the propaganda of Hamas, Congresswoman Tlaib has yet to delete the tweet that says Israel just bombed the Baptist hospital, killing 500 Palestinians, doctors, children, patients, just like that. Delete the tweet. We cannot have members of the United States Congress sending out and being an extension of the Hamas propaganda machine. It is despicable behavior from elected representatives of the greatest nation on God's green earth. Those members did not start their anti-Semitic comments on October the 8th. This started months and even years prior. There is a cancer that is metastasizing on the radical extreme left that has to be dealt with in America. I've said several times over the past several days that Psalms 122:6 is so important, that we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and those who do will prosper. There is no doubt in my heart, there is no doubt in my mind that we find ourselves living in dangerous times in this world. Conflicts in Eastern Europe, now conflicts in the Middle East, and real threats in the Indo-Pacific. We need American mettle, we need American leadership, and we need it to be strong, defiant, clear, and undeniably the strongest force for good on the planet. It's one of the reasons why I made strong comments about the terrible decision, the unbelievable decision to release $6 billion for hostages. I said this during the Obama administration, that paying $400 million for hostages would make more Americans less safe abroad and raise the price on every head. And now, with $6 billion being paid to Iran, Iran being the chief funder of Hamas, after the attacks, Hamas thanks Iran for the help. We do not need an administration to be complicit with such challenging and evil attacks on the Jewish state. As one reason why I seek, Madam President, I seek consent to pass my legislation, the Solidify Iranian Sanctions Act. In 1996, we put in place sanctions on Iran. We did so in the sector of their energy sector because we understood that causing pain would be an important and necessary component of keeping Iran in its place to slow down, if not stop, the spread of terrorism. We had to act, and I'm thankful that in 1996 we did act. But that action is set to sunset. It is set to expire. We must keep those sanctions in place. Without any question. I look at the support. I look at the support for my legislation. This legislation predates the attacks on the nation of Israel. This bill has the support from both sides of the aisle. It is a common sense step to make permanent the Iran Sanctions Act of 1996, and support comes from both sides of the aisle, including the only Jewish mother in the Senate, Senator Rosen. This is one of many steps we must take to restrain this regime from developing weapons that threaten safety and security around the world. I believe that if we want to respond to this brutality, if we want to respond to this evil, one of the ways that we can respond is by making permanent the sanctions on Iran. I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 1390 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The junior senator, or the senior senator from Utah.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, I appreciate the passion with which the senator from South Carolina has delivered his remarks today, and also grateful for his willingness to adopt a minor modification, a savings clause, clarifying that nothing in this legislation may be construed as independently authorizing the use of military force against Iran or any country. That's something we should do independently. So I'm grateful for the senator from South Carolina's willingness to work with me on that, and that he's agreed to do it. The junior senator from Kentucky, Senator Paul, has suffered a death in his family and is away today attending the funeral of that immediate family member. At his request, I'm here to object on his behalf, and on behalf of Senator Paul, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I am deeply disappointed that common sense seems to be harder to find in Washington, D.C. It's just not common enough. I certainly hope that we have an opportunity to see CISA, my bill, make permanent the sanctions against Iran. It is critically important that we show progress sidelining the largest state supporter of terrorism in the world.
To get the heck out of the middle of a war. But either way, I will put them on record today. But not because they want to, but because they are forced to debate this issue because I bring it to the floor. We have learned that the soldiers who perished tragically in 2017 in Niger were on a mission authorized by Section 127E of Title 10 of the U.S. Code. What is that? It's a piece of the law that unfortunately has been put forward by the legislature to give the president the power to do whatever he wants up to $100 million. The authority to expend up to $100 million during a fiscal year to, and I quote the law, provide support to foreign forces, irregular forces, groups or individuals engaged in supporting or facilitating authorized ongoing military operations. That's a lot of fancy words to say the president can do anything he wants anywhere in the world because we gave him this power. Where there's something in the Constitution that says that we cannot delegate our power. The Constitution doesn't allow the legislature to delegate their power to the executive. We can't give up our war-making power. This is unconstitutional. You cannot allow just little wars to happen up to $100 million per year without any vote. That's giving up the authority the Constitution gave to us. It's clearly unconstitutional and should be repealed. In short, this section of legal code provides the Pentagon unilateral authority to wage secret wars anywhere in the world without any oversight by Congress and even less public scrutiny. Unfortunately, the loss of 4 of our soldiers illuminates the fact that our troops are operating under this authority are also in harm's way. Earlier this month, the Biden administration finally formally declared that a military coup took place in Niger. Once that declaration was made, the United States was statutorily required to suspend all foreign and military assistance. You'd think that would include having 1,000 troops there. A senior administration official stated to CNN that the counterterrorism operations will remain paused, as will all U.S. training activities to build the capacity of the Nigerian forces. It seems as if our troops have no mission. Someone should explain why we're still leaving them in the middle of a war. French President Emmanuel Macron recently announced that France will end its military presence in Niger and bring some 1,500 soldiers home. We should also bring our 1,000 troops home. To commit America's military to fight wars on behalf of the nation is the most consequential and humbling responsibility that Congress is entrusted with. Can we not at the very least muster the courage to have a debate? If America's interest in Niger is of such vital importance that we ask our young men to fight and potentially pay the ultimate sacrifice to defend it, we at least owe our soldiers a debate in Congress. Not your grandparents debated this, your parents debated this, or another generation debated this, but that we are willing to debate here and now whether or not we should be at war in Niger. A yes vote on my resolution gives each of us an opportunity to go on record and tell our constituents that we will no longer stand idly by as the President sends their sons and daughters into harm's way to fight wars with no clear objective, with no definition of victory, with no exit strategy, and with no constitutional authorization. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes to take America out of hostilities in Niger. Discharge Senate Joint Resolution 44.
Clerk will report the motion to discharge.
Senator from Kentucky, Mr. Paul, moves to discharge S.J. Res. 44, directing the removal of United States Armed Forces and so forth from the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, I rise in opposition to my friend's motion to discharge this from our committee. Let me start by where he left off. He's asking that we remove our troops from hostilities in Niger. Let me say this as clearly as I can. We have no troops involved in hostilities in Niger. If we did, this would be a big deal, and this place would be full, and we'd be talking about combat operations. We do not have that. The United States is not involved in combat operations in Niger. We do conduct focused intelligence operations to protect our troops in the region, as well as our partners and allies, and most importantly, to monitor threats. It is inaccurate to equate routine security assistance and counterterrorism operations and monitoring with involvement in hostilities. This incorrect assumption threatens U.S. security assistance around the globe. A swift U.S. withdrawal from Niger, as proposed in this resolution, would weaken our regional reconnaissance efforts to monitor terrorist activities, which, of course, are in the national security interest of the United States of America and all American citizens. It would also leave the door open for Russia to come in and take over our facilities. In early 2023, AFRICOM Commander General Michael Langley told Congress that, quote, Africa is the epicenter of international terrorism, an understatement at best and something we all knew. Since then, the threat has nothing but grown against the United States interests and partners in the Sahel as it has grown. Iran and the Wagner Group, backed by Kremlin, seek to exploit Sahel's weakness by aligning with military juntas. Despite the recent coup in Niger, weakening the country's security and invoking U.S. restrictions on aid, Niger remains vital for Western counterterrorism in the Sahel and for observation purposes. America cannot be the policeman of the world, but that does not mean we should not have observation posts. We should not do counterintelligence, national security monitoring, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do intelligence operations. With all due respect to my friend, I know that this is well-intentioned, but the result would be very negative for U.S. national security. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I too also oppose this motion, and for the reasons that Senator Risch outlined. Our presence there are not troops in hostility. To the contrary, we've been asked for the African partners have asked for our support, and our European allies are looking for us to stand firm. This is a situation where our troops are welcomed in order to prevent the terrorist activities that are taking place in that part of Africa. We had a committee hearing on the Sahel this week, and we saw the circumstances in this part of Africa. It's dangerous there. The U.S. presence is helping save lives and to contain terrorism. Our partners in Africa want us there to deal with that threat. Now is not the time to signal that we are abandoning them. This is not the time to draw down our military presence in Niger, which could directly impact their security. Now is not the time for the United States to send a message that we cannot be relied upon. Think about what this says to our partners if we were to pull out. Think about what it says to our enemies. Russia already has a foothold in Africa, including right next door in Mali. Their presence has been absolutely devastating for the people of the countries where it operates. Russia's affiliated forces have committed horrific human rights atrocities. Just in Mali, the Wagner mercenaries and local armed forces are believed to have massacred 500 people in March of 2022. That's why our presence is so valuable and so important to that region. We do not give enough attention to that part of the world. We certainly don't want to signal that we're abandoning that part of the world. If we do that, we leave a vacuum. And we leave a vacuum, Russia will fill it, the Wagner mercenaries will fill it. I urge my colleagues to defeat the motion.
Senator from Kentucky.
The opponents of the resolution have stated here today on the floor that no troops are involved in combat in Niger. I think the families of the 4 soldiers who died over there would be surprised to find out that their loved ones who gave their lives were not involved in combat. What an insult. They would also be surprised, or people would be surprised, to find out that killing someone with a drone is not combat. One of the main bases we have in Niger is a drone base for killing people. So if it is not combat to kill people with a drone, and it is not combat to have 4 soldiers die, I'm not sure what combat is. But this is clearly combat. It's clearly wrong. It clearly has not been authorized and should not be authorized. The argument has also been made by opponents of this resolution that they want us there, that all of Africa is in open arms and wants us there. Well, guess what? The people who rule the country of Niger don't. They asked the French to leave, and the French are leaving. All 1,500 troops are leaving. They've asked us to leave. Maybe we should take their advice. It's not a democratically elected government. So the junta, the military junta that took over and put the president in jail, wants us to leave. The people who want us to stay are in other countries who have threatened war with Niger for imprisoning the president. There's a conflict. There have been 17 military coups in this part of the world. This part of Africa in the last decade has had 17 coups, and guess what? 11 of the coups are led by people trained in the United States. This is a policy that's not working. We think it's a benign policy. It's a terrible policy. We're bringing them here, training them. They're going over and deposing the democratically elected president. Don't be fooled. There is combat there. 4 of our soldiers have died, and it's an insult to their families to say it's not combat. They don't want us. The junta has asked us to leave, and I would support this resolution which says we need to bring our troops home.
Senator from Maryland.
I just want to correct the record. It is correct that they asked the French to leave, but they have not. They want America's presence there. They have not asked America's troops to leave. That's why it's not hostilities. We're there at their invitation, not as a hostile force.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, very briefly to respond to my good friend from Kentucky. First of all, we are not conducting drone strikes out of Niger. We have not, we are not, we will not. As far as the 4 troops who were killed in 2017, the good senator knows that was well investigated. It was not during combat operations that they were killed, that U.S. troops were involved in. It was a one-off that certainly was accidental. We are not engaged in hostilities or combat in Niger. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Opponents of this resolution say we're not involved in combat and the drones aren't killing people. Guess what? All those records are secretive. They're all classified and put away from the American people. We have no idea what they're doing with drones. I tend to doubt it, and I do think drones have killed people. I also think that we are using our ability to surveil and oversee the region to give them targets for their own drones. So no, we are involved. When they say that the people of Niger want us to stay, are they talking about the president who's in jail? The guy that was elected is in jail. Are they now saying it's justified to say because a bunch of thugs that took over the government by military force want us to stay? What a crazy notion. You're here on the floor today supporting the junta. You'll support whatever it takes to stay there. You don't care whether it's a democratically elected government or a junta, but it's a mess. The surrounding countries support the president who's in jail, some of them. 2 or 3 of them that have had juntas of themselves support the junta. It's a mess. The French are leaving because it's a mess. There is no clear mission. Our mission was to train their troops. Are you going to train the junta's troops? They've been declared a coup. Even the Biden administration has declared them a coup, and we're cutting off funding, but we're going to leave troops in the middle of a war. If they are killed by a terrorist attack, if hundreds of our soldiers are killed as they were killed in Beirut, I think people will rue the day you put our soldiers in the middle of a thankless situation with no mission, no plan, and no approval by Congress. I recommend a yes vote on the resolution. The Federal Reserve effectively controls the economy, but without scrutiny. No other institution has so much unchecked power. The Fed demonstrated its unlimited authority during the pandemic. The Fed printed money, purchased government-backed securities, and doled out massive amounts of money to favored industries. The result added almost $5 trillion to the Fed's balance sheet, the largest in our history. When Dodd-Frank ordered a limited, one-time audit of Fed actions, the Government Accountability Office uncovered that during the financial crisis, the Fed doled out over $16 trillion to domestic and foreign banks. This kind of inflationary bailout should not be kept secret from the public. While the Fed's easy money policies make the rich richer, the side effect is high inflation. As Milton Friedman famously explained, inflation is taxation without legislation. Congress cannot control the Fed's actions, but Fed actions can cost Americans dearly. Just ask any parent who has to feed his or her family during historically high inflation rates. My amendment would require a full audit of the Fed within 1 year. It is time for the Federal Reserve to operate in a manner that is transparent and accountable to the taxpayers. I ask for a yes vote. December 15th, 2023, Seamus Creighton Kirk and Adam Weiss.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to call up Senator Lee's Amendment 1121 and ask that it be reported by number.
Without objection, the amendment will be reported by number.
Senator from Kentucky for Mr. Lee proposes an amendment numbered 1121 to amendment number 1092.
Madam President.
The Senate will be in order. Under the previous order, there will now be up to 2 minutes of debate, equally divided.
Madam President.
The junior senator from Kentucky.
Our Declaration of Independence asserts that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. While voters may elect members of Congress, Americans are increasingly governed by bureaucrats they do not know, will never meet, and cannot hold accountable. In 2022, the Biden administration imposed $117 billion in regulatory costs on the American people. Unelected, unknown, and unaccountable bureaucrats should not unilaterally develop the most significant public policies that impose costly burdens on American families and businesses. To restore Republican accountability to our government, Senator Lee and I propose that we adopt as an amendment a bill that I have introduced for several years called the REINS Act. The REINS Act would require Congress to affirmatively approve every new major rule proposed by the executive branch before it's permitted to become effective. By passing the REINS Act, the American people, through their elected officials, will reclaim the ability to prevent unnecessary government interference in everyday life. I ask for a yes vote.
The junior senator from Michigan.
Madam President, this amendment would prevent federal agencies from effectively serving the American people. It would weaken the government's ability to enact key health and safety standards. It would endanger a range of public protections for the environment, American workers, and people with disabilities. And it would stifle innovation for emerging technologies such as self-driving cars, artificial intelligence, and other tools that will help carry our country forward. Madam President, I urge my colleagues to join me in voting no on this amendment.
The question is on the amendment.
The Federal Reserve effectively controls the economy, but without scrutiny. No other institution has so much unchecked power. The Fed demonstrated its unlimited authority during the pandemic. The Fed printed money, purchased government-backed securities, and doled out massive amounts of money to favored industries. The result added almost $5 trillion to the Fed's balance sheet, the largest in our history. When Dodd-Frank ordered a limited, one-time audit of Fed actions, the Government Accountability Office uncovered that during the financial crisis, the Fed doled out over $16 trillion to domestic and foreign banks. This kind of inflationary bailout should not be kept secret from the public. While the Fed's easy money policies make the rich richer, the side effect is high inflation. As Milton Friedman famously explained, inflation is taxation without legislation. Congress cannot control the Fed's actions, but Fed actions can cost Americans dearly. Just ask any parent who has to feed his or her family during historically high inflation rates. My amendment would require a full audit of the Fed within 1 year. It is time for the Federal Reserve to operate in a manner that is transparent and accountable to the taxpayers. I ask for a yes vote.
Senator from Ohio.
President, I rise today speaking in opposition to the Paul Amendment. Members of both parties have always agreed an independent, underscore independent, central bank is critical to a functioning economy. Congress put in place a restriction to shield the Fed's monetary policy from political influence. This long-standing restriction ensures that the Fed isn't subject to the whims of Congress, to the partisanship, to the nihilism, if I could use another word, of too often people in this body. Whether it's threatening a default or a government shutdown, all too common because of dysfunction and chaos in the House of Representatives, whether it's threatening a default or a government shutdown. We've already seen how partisanship so negatively impacts people's pocketbooks in the broader economy. We don't need it here, too. This amendment would make the Fed less effective. It would open it up to all kinds of nefarious political pressure. Congress already requires that the Fed undergo regular review of their operations, of their programs, of their balance sheet, of their financial statements. These are some of the ways Congress holds the Fed accountable while avoiding dangerous political interference. This amendment's irrelevant to what we're voting on today, is yet another impediment to keeping our government open. It shouldn't be partisan. It shouldn't be political. Those antics should stay out of this debate. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the Paul amendment, and I yield the floor.
Will now be up to 4 minutes of debate, equally divided.
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
the national debt just recently surpassed $33 trillion. That's $280,000 per household. Unless we change course, the debt only increases. CBO predicts trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. We borrow over $176 million every hour. $3 million is borrowed every minute and $50,000 every second. It is out of control. Net interest payments are anticipated to double from $475 billion to $1 trillion by fiscal year 2028. Interest will be the largest item of expenditure for the federal government. Americans could pay dearly for Congress's inability to say no to the welfare and warfare state. It could mean confiscatory tax rates, high inflation, and a weak economy. But it doesn't have to be this way. My amendment begins the path towards fiscal health by saving the taxpayers $30 billion. My amendment also cuts $25 billion that the Biden administration wants to use to sick the IRS on taxpayers to squeeze them for even more money. That's a reduction of $55 billion from what the government is on track to spend. I urge a yes vote on my amendment. Thank you.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, we have a bipartisan package before us. This amendment that's being offered would slash funding supported unanimously in our committee in the Ag and TFED bills. Kicking women and kids off of WIC or gutting funding for our farmers and agricultural research, making our food supplies less safe, laying off air traffic controllers leading to flight delays and cancellations, booting people from their homes as housing assistance would be cut off, eliminating resources for communities to invest in important local infrastructure needs, and a lot more. This would be catastrophic. The bills we are considering today have been carefully drafted. They're written to the spending levels that were set by the debt ceiling agreement that the House Republicans and the President agreed on. Congress passed it into law. So I urge my colleagues to vote no.